Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? That's great. So what you're hearing is rain, okay? I remember moving to Des Moines from Fort Collins, Colorado about 6 years ago. And we were doing an orientation in the Olson Center. And one of the sirens went off that might go off tonight, but I assure you, you're in a safe place. That siren went off, and I'm really kind of like, what's going on? And one of the students that was raised here in Iowa said, Dr. Salas, you're not from Iowa, are you? And I said, no, I'm from Colorado. He goes, well, we need to go to the tunnel, so we're in a safe space. But I've been told that we are in a safe space here. I can't guarantee it 100%, but I think you're in a good place here. It's an honor and privilege for me to be able to introduce our guest lecturer, our guest speaker tonight. I always have to do this because Mom told me to eat my carrots. I didn't always follow her advice. Tonight's AViD guest was born in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts grew up in Lenoir, North Carolina, a city of about 18,000 people. According to an interview Watts did with North Carolina Public Radio, it was the kind of town where people lined up to go to McDonald's when it first opened. Dr. Watts eventually moved on from Lenoir, graduating from the University of Northern North Carolina at Charlotte before receiving her PhD at the University of Missouri. Her debut story collection, We Are Only Taking What We Need, was published in 2012 and immediately received high praise. She received the Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence, an award recognizing rising African-American fiction writers. The following year, the Oprah magazine called the story collection of their best summer reads. Stephanie returned home in a sense with her first novel last year, titled No One Is Coming to Save Us. The story is that of a young African-American man named J.J. Ferguson. J.J. is also returning home to his hometown in Pinewood, North Carolina, a rural town set in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Ferguson had moved away years ago. He returns wealthy and ready to woo his high school sweetheart, who has since been married. Dr. Watts' book has been described as a Great Gatsby, but set in modern-day rural North Carolina with an African-American community. Those are high standards to live up to, but Dr. Watts has done so. Earlier this year, she won the NAACP Image Award for Best Debut Author. She currently lives in Pennsylvania, where she is an associate professor at Lehigh University. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Dr. Stephanie Powell Watts.
Okay, can you hear me? Is that on? Well, thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. This is amazing. I really thought there'd be a couple of you, and we'd have a glass of wine, and and call it an evening. But it's wonderful. It's awesome that you're here. Thank you. Thank you so much to Sue Woody and to the library and to all the sponsors. These are the kinds of things that make a community, bringing people together, talking about important issues. Public libraries in general have been a huge part of my life, and I really appreciate you bringing me here. So, well, first of all, there's my cover here. It's the same artist that did Michelle Obama's portrait did my cover, and I love it. I really love it. And when it came out, when it was published and I saw it, my editor called me and said, it looks like Michelle Obama, and it doesn't really, but it does have the same kind of coloring and, the white dress against the kind of blue. So I'm really excited about it. Let me get my books before I forget. Oh, and I am not standing in a hole, I'm just short. So I'm asked a lot about stories and where they come from and where I get ideas for them. So I thought I'd talk about a couple of story ideas that I'm working with, and also about some stories that I've already written and where they come from. I was in Atlanta for a conference, and it was actually a library conference. And there were two middle-aged black women cleaning up in one of the bathrooms. I was in this line along the wall, and there was a big mirror here, so I could see the women doing what they were doing. You know, there was a little supply closet here, and one woman was here, and one woman was here. So, you know, at conferences, you know how it is, or concerts, the women's bathroom is always packed. So along the line, there were a whole line of white women, or women who appeared to be white, and me, and the black woman here. So a woman came out of the stall, and she went up to one of the African-American women. A white woman came out of the stall, and she said to the woman, "Thank you for the work that you do." And so the woman looked at her, registered nothing, said nothing, and went on to the supply closet. So I'm watching this in the mirror, and I'm thinking, what is going on here? You know, what's the story here? And I thought, well, maybe she's deaf, you know, but she talked to the other woman. She appeared to hear her, so I don't think that was it. And I thought, well, maybe she saw something I didn't see in the woman's face. Maybe there was something condescending about it, and she noticed that, but I didn't see it. But I don't know, and so I kept volleying this whole idea around. You know, what do we owe each other? Does the African-American woman owe the white woman a reply? Does she owe her a thank you? Can she not respond and it be okay? Or does the white woman, was it wrong for her to say thank you? Is that ever wrong? Do you ever feel like that there are instances or situations when someone saying some kind of affirmation is wrong? So anyway, I've been batting that around, trying to figure out who these people are. And I know it's going to be a story sometime, because it's been kind of worming its way through my head and figuring out who these people are. The other idea I've been working on lately is I have an 8-year-old child. And when he was 7, we were riding down the road. He's strapped in his booster seat, and I hear him say, "I'm a white man living in a white man's town. Take a shot of cocaine and burn it down." I'm like, what? Where in the world did he even get this? I think I've got to figure out what they're showing on Sesame Street these days, because that I don't understand at all. But any of you are Jason Isbell fans, my husband's a big fan, and so he probably heard it from my husband playing Jason Isbell. And my son doesn't know anything about being a white man or being in a white man's town, certainly not cocaine. You know, but what's interesting to me about both of these moments is that they are these kind of quiet collisions of race and class. And those are the things that I think those are things that are most interesting to me when I'm writing. And those are the things that kind of flip the switch and flip the trigger for me for a story. The real story is not that anecdote, and not either of those anecdotes. The real story is, what do those characters need? And when I can find that out, when I figure that out, then I'll have a trajectory for the story. So I really feel like that writing is a hopeful act, that we write stories to explain the world to ourselves, we write to explain the world to ourselves individually and to other people, and we need these stories to connect to a time and a place and to reinforce our shared humanity. Often, however, when we're faced with the fearful, we give into the temptation to tell the story that we want and not the story that is. We look for control instead of revelation. We look to shape the narrative for psychological safety instead of uncomfortable truth. People love and want stories. They need stories. And that was really proved true to me when I was working as a Jehovah's Witness. Maybe working is the wrong word, but when I was active as a Jehovah's Witness, And for many years, I went door to door. I talked to all kinds of people, and I saw my share of all kinds of people, mean people and really lovely people, people who were surprised I was there, people who might have been impressed because they liked the whole idea of your religion in action, people who were definitely not impressed. But what I remember most were the lonely people, and there were so many of them. These people did open the door, but they were always really suspicious, but as soon as they saw you, like, here's somebody who's not a threat to me, here's someone who's not going to hurt me, here's somebody with a Bible, and they invited you in immediately, gave you food or offered you food and drink, told everything about their lives, as much as they could tell. Their need in the room, you could feel it, it was palpable. One of the people that I met that I'll never forget is this young woman who agreed to do a weekly Bible study with me. So I'd gone to her house, we talked, she told me about her boyfriend that she couldn't keep a hold of, he wouldn't stay for very long with her. They had a child together, she had great hopes for the child. They were smothering poverty. When I returned the following week, she'd moved out of the trailer and completely disappeared. Even the curtains were gone from the trailer. And I thought, this is the best way to dodge a Jehovah's Witness I have ever seen. I have had people hide in all kinds of ways, but not just move entirely and pick up their whole lives. I never saw or heard from her again, but I thought so much about her. Most people are not exactly that way. Most people are a little bit more guarded, and most people don't flood you right at first. They just kind of crack open and let their lives crack open into yours. Either way, the people want to tell. You might think that people try to hide themselves from each other, or at least that's what I thought, but the opposite is true. People are desperate to explain themselves, to reveal themselves, and have another person take testimony of their lives. This is a story, I just want to read a couple of pages of it. This is a story that I wrote based on some of my experiences in the field. And this is from my short story collection. This cover is also Amy Sherrill. I love this one. It's so vivid. But the name of the story is Unassigned Territory. And Unassigned Territory is the place in the county, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, that's way off in the boonies. You don't get to it very often because you just don't have time. And so usually this is done in the summers. And so you probably have kind of rural areas that are way out. And so this is a story based on some of the things that I did. Leslie Pawlowski parks her blue Horizon on the shoulder of the dirt road, the best shade we can find. July is a killer in North Carolina. Hot as blazes, hot enough for you, hot enough to fry eggs, and on and on. We are in the thick of it, mid-morning, our dresses clinging to our backs, way far in the middle of nowhere, preaching door to door, working in our congregation's unassigned territory. This is the kind of dirt road, hee-haw, overall, straw in the teeth place even we Southerners make fun of. Pikes and Wagner's country. Did you hear the one about the Pike girl who went to a town doctor? The doctor says to her mother, "Ma'am, has this girl had intercourse?" And the mother, hands wringing, says, "I don't rightly know, doctor, but if she needs it, you make sure you give it to her." The passenger side window sticks in the middle of going up or down. It's a piece of junk car. And on the way to every door, we shed bits of polyfoam from the car's cracked upholstery. Leslie has a great attitude about her poverty. She will remember it with a withering chuckle when her future kids complain of their own first cars. We visited too many houses without updating our field service records, and we stop before we forget the details. We keep details. We keep records for ourselves, for the congregation file, for the official log we store at the Kingdom Hall. What's that woman's name at the blue trailer, Steph? I shuffle through my notebooks, knowing I won't find any useful information. You're supposed to write things like, Ruth Boaz, 123 Main Street, blue trailer, lived in town all her life, no husband in the house, 4 kids, 1 still at home, took the July 1989 awake, making the most of your youth, expressed an interest in tarot, bring the magazine, Why Godly People Shun Spiritism. My records are, to say the least, incomplete. I wrote, the trailer is a nightmare. Looks like the time my brother and I played drug czar with an old suitcase and Monopoly money. Ryan threw my clothes and shoes out of the dresser and into the closet screaming, where's the real stash? Where's the real stash? I'm praying that Leslie won't ask to see what I've written. I've been at this long enough that I don't need any guidance from my field service partner. Sometimes Leslie will say things like, you're writing a book over there, aren't you? But she never pries. Shoot, I hate to leave her name off, and she was nice too. Nice to Leslie means she didn't cuss us, that she didn't shoo us away or hide behind her curtains, her hand over the mouth of her child like a kidnapper. But Mama, the kids would manage through her fingers. There's some girls on the porch. Shh, I imagine her saying, do you want to be saved? Is that what you want? So, sorry. So I often tell my 7-year-old, but now 8-year-old, he just turned 8, so I have to get used to that. My bedtime stories. I tell him the stories that I always loved as a kid: Greek myths, fairy tales, folk tales. More than once, about halfway through, I've realized that there are murders, assaults, maybe even terrifying things like, when the tale gets to the part where Zeus sees the lovely maiden in the meadow, then I have to figure out something else that's happened in the story. He's just 8 years old, and he'll get all of that soon enough. And I think that revision is okay for kids. We want them to know the joys of stories, but we also want them to sleep. We, on the other hand, are grown-ups, and we need the truth. We need to be awake. Part of the ways that we're thinking about stories lately is in terms of nostalgia. We're living in very much a nostalgic age. And I don't want to gloss over too much of the stories, but I also want to be able to tell a story that makes sense from the past, that makes sense for not just my child, but for grown people. The problems in the past were not slight. They were often the result of institutionalized systems of exclusion. They're not easily and laughably fixed. There are no neat and tidy endings. And I don't want to gloss over the terror of the stories that I know existed and remember only the easy solutions or the funny parts. That impulse does not give the past the honest appraisal it deserves. And without truth, nothing in the past can be trusted. I've started to think about a huge part of my own past story that I've glossed over for years in exchange for a more acceptable childhood. When I was a kid, we moved around a lot. We didn't always move out of town and never out of the state of North Carolina. Often our move was just a few streets over from where we started. I can't remember the first time we moved when I knew for sure that it would only be temporary and that there would be always another pack up, another move, a few months or maybe a year at most down the line. I do remember our first move. After my parents' divorce, my mother, 2 of my 4 brothers, and I left the dirt road for a house in the next small town. The house was old, though not charmingly so, definitely in before condition, and surrounded by many other tiny, rundown houses. It wasn't all bad. There's things I still remember. There was this little niche for the phone that I thought was really cool that I'd never seen before, and I still remember that 30 years later. For the few months that we lived there, we stumbled over boxes, trash bags of clothes, toys, and miscellaneous junk piled everywhere there was space. We didn't stay in this house long enough to unpack. I remember being excited about this. It's hard to believe, but now that I've moved as an adult, and then it was a great adventure. Life was different then. The people we knew were skinny and poor and drove around in dogs of cars, counted out money from piggy banks at the end of the month for gas. We did not travel. We knew nothing of the world. We marveled at the middle-aged people we knew from school that had been to Paris or London and could prove it with slides. We didn't have disposable income. That wasn't even a phrase we'd ever heard. Everyone we knew lived frugally by necessity and not because it was cool to buy local or raise your own vegetables or shop secondhand. My mother was convinced and convincing, and every time she felt the need, she sold us on the idea that this next move would change our lives. She believed in the power of place as the springboard for our reinvention. Anything was possible this time. The slate of our existence would be wiped clean, and we would get to rethink and redo everything. I caught her enthusiasm. I loved the anticipation of the move, the process of going through our possessions and deciding what was good enough to take with us. We only had room for good. My mother's motto could have been, change your address and change your life. And she seemed to believe every time that this was true, that this was the move that could make everything okay. Mothers all around the country from every walk of life, like my mom, scrape together every penny they have, set their sights on a new place, and start over. The urge for change, any life-altering change, is strong. The desperate need for control of anything at all is even stronger. Moving is kinetic, purposeful, at a time when the world seems most out of control. The mind needs diversion from constant trouble, grows weary from weariness, tired from constant fatigue. The mind can focus only so long on pain or lack or loneliness and needs a persistent and consuming outlet that feels necessary. Pack everything you own, stuff the kids in the car, find the right house, find the right life. I've since learned that a good number of poor women with their children move with regularity. I did not know that until I was an adult. I always thought I'm the only one. I'm the only one in the room who's done that. I'm the only one who's been up all night, packing stuff in the car. But this happens all the time. Have you read Hillbilly Elegy? Have you read that book? His mother, same thing. W. Kamau Bell's book. Has anybody read that? It's very funny. His mother, the same thing. And over again, you hear that this is happening with people. And there's no pathology, there's nothing in this world that somebody else isn't suffering right along with you. And that's one of the lessons of life that has been strange to know. This is a story of my life that I found hard to honestly access. I hated thinking about being the new kid. I hated thinking about moving. But watching and evaluating the other kids, figuring out who's going to give me trouble, figuring out who's going to like me and be my friend, has come in handy so many times in my writing life. Thinking about the words and gestures that mean hostility or care has helped me decide how to create a character. Life is bizarre and maybe even merciful in that the things you hate most in your experience can come to your assistance later. I'm also realizing that my past moves spurred my interest in people who didn't move. My novel is about the women who stayed behind, who stayed behind, who chose their home instead of moving somewhere else and thinking, I can make it somewhere else, I can't make it here. It's been called a Gatsby reboot. It's not a retelling of Gatsby, though I do love The Great Gatsby. But Gatsby is so much a different kind of story. It's, as you know, about a man returning to his past love. She's married and figuring out how he can live that fantasy with her. I want to read just a little excerpt. This is from the novel, and this is one of the moves in the novel, and kind of the fantasy of the move. Decades ago, some of their people, close relatives, had packed their few belongings, closed up their shacks, or gave away what they couldn't carry and set off for a northern state. They got as far as D.C., where the word was that jobs were plentiful there, even for a black body. The way they told it, a grown person could breathe, have a home, grow a family, with a kind of independence and dignity only imagined in the South. Sylvia's Aunt Dee and Uncle Fred had gone with their children to find what they'd all been hearing. At first, they got no word from them, but as the weeks progressed, the months, word trickled down that the family was living like kings, walking on gold-paved streets, frequenting clubs, shows, and restaurants like high society, right there along with the bourgeois black people in fur coats and high-button shoes, haughty expressions on their own faces, just like the Negroes they'd rubbed shoulders with. Sylvia had ached to be one of them and had listened with rapt attention when they came home to visit every year with their stories of affluence and triumph. Years would pass before her cousins revealed to them the particulars of their real life in the city and the scrum of too many people in too little space, living in thin-walled slums with a backbeat of constant angry noise on the streets, and seeker after seeker, fresher and newer black immigrants hell-bent on conquering another hostile world. Aunt Dee had cleaned for rich women, Fred had bowed and scraped, and on good days they watched the final drops of amber liquor slide out of one bottle, then another bottle. They, with their fellow displaced Southern friends that they had glommed onto like life rafts, sat together in somebody's too hot or too cold room and cried woeful tears about the vicious shithole of home they foolishly missed that they could not come back to without the permanent stain of defeat. I haven't lived with my mother for a long time now, for 25 years now, and it's been a long time since I felt that kind of enthusiasm of the move sweeping me to the next bright future. But I still feel that kind of tickle of desire every 2 or 3 years to pack the car and leave the broken behind and start over. I want to talk just a little bit about Gatsby. Because Gatsby is, I hope that my book is in conversation with Gatsby a little bit. It is not a retelling of Gatsby, though. So what do you remember about Gatsby? When you think the Great Gatsby, what do you think about? Yes? Oh, yeah, reinvention. What else? Oh, yes, yeah. Excess, reinvention. What else? What? Deceit. Oh, how?
No, I just felt like Daisy presented one thing and acted another way. I thought she was I just didn't trust her. That's kind of the reason why I didn't like it that much, but I didn't trust Daisy.
That's right. I hadn't thought it quite that way, but yeah. So reinvention and deceit. What else? What else do you think about? What are some images that come to your head? Parties. Oh my gosh. You know, in any kind of movie adaptation, they go crazy with the parties. You know, sometimes it's music that's not contemporary, that is contemporary music. Lavish, big parties. What else? You were going to say something.
That's what I was going to say. Grand parties.
Grand parties, absolutely. And then, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, there's so many images, I think, that we associate. All of these kind of thematics are absolutely what I think of, too, when I think about Gatsby. I think about those beautiful shirts. You remember the beautiful shirts? And you remember the green light, and these crazy parties. And one of the things that always comes to me is at the parties, there's somebody whose job it is to juice all night so that they can have fresh juice for their cocktails. It is about total excess, and that's so much of what Gatsby is. And I really did want to play on that idea, but to turn it into in what would ordinary people do? What would people do who did not have access to this kind of excess? How would they then seek out the beloved, right? How would you do that if you didn't have that? I wanted to tell a story about love, and love is a huge story in Gatsby, but I wanted it to be not a fantasy, but a story about desire from the point of view of the women. Women like me, like my mother, like my grandmothers, women who felt trapped by their own ignorance of the world, trapped by their own bodies. My women characters, like Myrtle Wilson from Gatsby, hail from the poorer section of town, but they aim to escape, not necessarily leave their geographical space, but escape the circumstances of their lives. One of the things that I've talked to a lot of people about Gatsby since my book came out, and one of the things that people don't say, and that I don't think of either, is like murder and death, and the poor woman in the middle of the street, the mutilated woman. We just don't think about that, and I don't think we're supposed to. I think that's part of the brilliance of the book, that it invokes a kind of nostalgia when you think about it. But it's not. It's about a very different kind of relationships. What I wanted to do is to kind of invert that, to say, let's look at this. Let's look at a realistic story if we could. Let's pop the bubble of fantasy, and then let's start from there. I wanted to write about uncommon desire, but I wanted it to be in the home pastures of North Carolina. My characters are past Jim Crow, but they still feel its lingering effects. They're post-segregation, but see the color line drawn clearly in their town. The setting is after the heyday of the furniture industry, where places that were hit hard by mechanization and technology and plants moving away, but though they still remain on the landscape. So I want to just read a quick section here. This is from the Avas Past. Sylvia is the matriarch of the book. She is around 70. Her daughter is Ava. She's around 40. She's trying to have a child, and there's a moment in their past that Ava remembers. And so this is what I wanted to invoke a kind of past, but without nostalgia. So this is what I was trying to do. She is at her grandmother's house, and her uncle Skip has come to her grandmother's house. Ava hardly had any time to fill the chipped plastic bowl her grandmother made the older kids wash the dishes in before her daddy's brother Skip and his two little girls showed up. Skip's wife Gina came to visit exactly twice a year, Easter and Christmas, both times in honor of a past when loving Jesus had been a part of her life. She was like a comet. Skip was not his real name, but he hated the awkward depression of the name Earl and renamed himself in high school. Too bad there was never a name that fit a body better than Earl fit her sad Uncle Skip. Y'all doing all right? Skip lowered himself into the chair like he was in his 80s instead of the 46-year-old man he was. You want to eat? There's supper in the oven. If you get here earlier, it might not be cold as a rock. Mama Laura said as she took out the plates from the cabinets for Skip and his girls. The two little girls watched from either side of their father. They were cute and dressed alike as usual, though they were not twins. You hungry, girls? Mama Laura said. The girls looked afraid to commit. Yes, ma'am, Jessica said. Just give the girls something. I'm too sick to eat today, Uncle Skip said as he rubbed his round little stomach. Her grandmother spooned sweet potatoes, chicken casserole, collard greens, and a square of cornbread. Mama Laura handed each girl a plate. Avery, give them some milk in plastic cups. The girls glanced at their plates and then at their father. Go ahead, eat what you can, Skip said. The girls took small bites that might register under a microscope. It was clear to anyone who had ever been a child that they hated everything they saw. Uncle Skip and Mama Laura were apparently too far away from those wonder years to remember. Don, Ava's daddy, was the opposite of Mama Laura, but Skip, she spit out identical to her and slapped a big porn star-approved mustache on. Never have you seen two separate people more alike. They were both happiness killers. If they came close to a flicker, a spark of happiness, they'd stamp it out quick before it spread. Excuse me. So we live in the middle of things. We didn't see the beginning, we'll not see the end. So the only narrative places that I feel like that offer us any comfort are in the past, and we long for that certainty, for the stories already lived and told. After us, the story will spin into millions and millions of permutations. What a comfort to revert to a moment in time that we clearly lived through long enough to tell about it. The past is static, but the future is alive with possibilities. It's kinetic, infinite, opening and stretching out in front of us. But that is the promise of America. that the future, we say in America that you can be anything, that it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't matter who your people are, that you can start here and start completely over. Of course, that's not entirely true, and of course that's a dream, but it is a dream, and it is an aspiration, and it makes, I think, us special. I'm reminded of the writer Charles Chestnut, the first best-selling and critically acclaimed African-American prose writer in America. He was from Ohio, but he lived in North Carolina for many years. He's the author of The Marrow of Tradition, which is set in a fictionalized Wilmington, North Carolina, and it's about the race riots of 1898. In every review or essay you ever read about Chestnut, it's mentioned that he's so light that no one would ever know that he had African ancestry. He could have passed as a white man, but he didn't. He did consider moving to Europe with his family and escaping the yoke of oppression, becoming not a black man in the world, but a man in the world. But Chestnut believed that America would change and expand, and his children would know a very different life from his own. He could not have predicted that many of those changes would take many generations to become reality. But like my mother, he was determined that he could find a home that would fit. He believed in America. He believed in the future. In his book, he told an American story about the failure of Reconstruction, but he still believed America had something of value to offer him, and he would return the favor. He was a seeker. I think we're all seekers. And blessed are the seekers, the people who can see home when it doesn't look like it. Thank you. Should I come here? Do you have preference?
No, whatever you do.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions out there? We're going to collect those, and let's give Stephanie another big round of applause. That was awesome.
Thank you.
So before we start taking questions for Stephanie, just a couple of announcements here. Stephanie's books are available for sale this evening by Beaverdale Books. She would be happy to autograph them right after the session. And of course, you've seen the refreshments out there and some of the goodies out there. Make sure that you enjoy those. And then, of course, the next AViD event is on Tuesday, May 15th at the Central Library with two former White House social secretaries who wrote a book called Treating People Well. And we hope to see you there. A lot of questions. Okay. I guess before we get to these,
Okay.
how were you able to arrange that great artist to do your cover? That I was in D.C. not long ago and got a chance to see the original.
Oh, I
and
haven't
it's just
seen it yet.
amazing artist. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I have a great editor, and this isn't always the case with your editors, but I have a great one, and she gave me a number of choices with the book. And so the first thing that she picked out, I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it, and so usually they say some nice version of you'll get used to it, that type of thing. But she said, okay, well, let me think about it. And she presented a number of things, that I thought were kind of there. And then I saw this, and I said, that's it. Can you see about getting that, And so she did, and then she showed me a couple other of her images, and I said, please put that on my short story collection.
Right. You knew it. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's a question for you. It says, I want to convey the ethnicity of my characters, but I don't know how to describe skin tones and complexions without references to food. Race is not a factor in the plot. Any point or tips? Any points or tips?
When I'm referencing skin tone, one of the things, back up for a second, one of the things I love about Amy's work is she does a grayscale on the skin, there's a kind of grayed out of it. And so it's kind of hard to tell what we're talking about in terms of skin tone, and saturation of color, which I really love because it takes that kind of off the table. But do not compare skin tone to food. I tell my students this all the time. Black people are not delicious. Do not call them mocha and almond and chocolate and caramel, and no, please don't do that. So that's one of my own kind of pet peeves. But the food metaphors are out, and I think probably because we've seen them so much, they're not novel or interesting anymore.
Okay. Sure.
But I think that I don't know that we need a whole lot of information about skin tone or complexion. I think that you invite the reader into the story, and you allow that reader to manufacture in his or her own heads something about the character. So you just provide enough information so that they can have that kind of mental imprint. But you don't really need to, and especially if it doesn't matter. If the person is very light, like I was talking about Charles Chestnut, he could pass as a white person. Maybe that matters in the story. Or if the person is very, very dark, like in Toni Morrison's newest book, the person's beauty is very, very dark. So that matters in the story. But if it doesn't, then just indicate that the person is a person of color, is African American, and let it go at that. We just don't need that. We don't need the particularities of that unless it matters, right? And
So allow the reader for that creative interpretation of the content. Sure.
Yes.
Okay, another question here. What was your path to higher education in writing? And I know you shared some of that earlier, but could you expand?
Yes, it was a circuitous path. As I mentioned, I was a Jehovah's Witness, and so Jehovah's Witnesses, and I don't mean to disparage them at all, but higher education was not a priority for Jehovah's Witnesses, and for some people even. I won't say it was prohibited, but it was just not something that was encouraged. And so to go to school or to decide to go to beyond your high school graduation was a real decision. And so I had a really hard time with that, because if you really believe something, if you believe that the most important work in the world is for people to come to an understanding of God, and that you taking time to do something else, and especially something that's some kind of intellectual endeavor that really doesn't line up with that, it can feel selfish. And so it was a long time. I didn't go to school right away. I had scholarships, and it was a big deal, and so many people were angry with me. I was angry with me. I didn't know what I was doing, and and so it took a while for me to decide. Okay, maybe I can follow this path and still be a good person. And that's a kind of journey I think that we all have to take in some way. How do I figure out what is the path to being a good person? Because I'd always thought that the only path is this way,
Right.
and so if I deviate from that, then I'm not going to be good anymore. And if I'm not good anymore, then what am I?
Sure.
And so it was difficult. That was a difficult time in my life. But I got my undergraduate degree, and I decided at the end of that I wanted to be a writer. But I also wanted to be able to take care of myself, and I didn't want to. And I have 4 younger brothers, and my parents don't have money. I'm a first-generation college student. So the arts are not really something, if you're in my position, that you feel like you can pursue.
Unknown territory, right?
Yeah.
First generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't know anybody who'd done that. So, so it was, I thought, well, if I get a PhD and if I become a professor, then I can have something that I can take care of myself and I can pursue the writing at the same time. I mean, it was a very naive way of thinking, because, you know, those two don't go hand in hand at all, you know. But that's what I thought. That's what I thought I could do.
Another question here from an aspiring writer. I would like to hear about your writing process. Laptop or pen in hand? The physical setup or writing area? Outline or start with a sentence? Getting past writer's block, etc. Whatever you like to share.
Okay, well, you know, anytime I'm speaking to a group, I know there are people out there who write and who really want to pursue this passion, and I so feel for you. You know, when I was in that audience too, you know, and I felt that so acutely, and so when people were talking about their book covers and their advances and their publicists, I'm like, I want those problems, you know, like. So know that I feel that. I feel that really strongly. I like to write in the mornings, and I like to write for an hour. That doesn't always happen, but that's my kind of routine. Sure. And I have to get up a little bit early because you know, get my son ready for school and that kind of thing. So if that doesn't happen, then I have to find an opportunity sometime in the day to get some writing done, because I have to write every day. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but it keeps me feeling like this is something that I do. And I think with writing, any of the arts, self-concept is so important, you know? You have to believe it. You have to believe this is who I am and this is what I do. And if I get out of it, and, you know, I start wondering, can I do that? I don't know if I can do, you know, and I can't afford to do that. I have too many anxieties to be in that space. So I have to write at least some every day, and preferably in the morning. I always write with the computer and with a pad. I like to have the kind of tactileness. I like to be able to move things around, you know, but I also like to be able to have the computer. And so I do a kind of mix and match with getting stuff down.
How about writer's block? Do you experience that? How do you deal with that? How do you move on?
Yeah, I don't know if it's block, you know, and maybe this is Pollyanna, it could very well be, but I feel like that when you don't know what's coming, you know, when you can't get it down, that there's some heat there, you know? There's something that you can't quite figure out yet. And that's productive to know that, like, what do they do now? You know, or what does this scene mean? And you think, I don't know. I mean, that's telling you need to really consider this. And so I always keep a couple of things going. You know, so if I can't get this happening, then I switch over to this other thing, because I can't stand the idea that I'm just sort of sitting there. And I know that can be really productive. It can be a gestation period, sure, you know, for your thinking about this thing. And almost always I find that if I go work on this other thing, that something sparks about the first thing that I was having a problem with. Okay. So I keep not more than two. Maybe three, but usually not more than two things, because then you just get into, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, you know. So, you know, kind of ping-ponging.
Sure. I have another question here. It says, I read Hillbilly Elegy not long ago. With that in mind for context, do you think the story of this family differs greatly from the story of a white family in similar circumstances? How does it differ, if it does?
That my story differs from them?
Yes. It says, let me read it one more time.
Okay.
I want to make sure I understand it as well.
Okay.
I read Hillbilly Elegy not long ago. With that in mind for context, do you think the story of this family differs greatly from the story of a white family in similar circumstances? How does it differ? And I guess I'm not sure if...
Yeah, I got it. I think I got it. That is my story about the loss of jobs and the sort of post-segregation story. Is it is it similar to a story like Hillbilly Elegy? I think that's what the writer is saying, and it's absolutely similar. I mean, the world that I'm writing from is almost post-industrial. There are lots of industry that has just gone, and it is really something. And you know, you can travel anywhere you want to at any time of day. You know, the parking lots are almost empty everywhere at all these plants. And these are plants that people did not necessarily want to be. You know, people didn't want to work there, but they could, and they could have a middle-class life, you know, if they did. And so, but even in, my father, he retired 3 years ago. And, you know, and even then, he was on like 3 days. You know, he worked at a furniture plant for his all of his career, but he was, you know, he was on 3 days at a time, 2 days at a time. Sometimes they would say, "Don't come in, you know, next week," that kind of thing. So I mean, I do think that there are many similarities with Vance's story about his family and this kind of story, but I do think that there are some very particular differences. And one, this is the South, and so there's some differences there historically, of course. And there's also these kind of wafting elements of a different sort of life. And what I mean by that is, in my story, there's a restaurant called Simmy's. And it used to be a restaurant where only white people could go to. There was a window in the back, and if you were black, you could come up to that window and get something, but otherwise you were not welcome in the restaurant. And so there are a lot of places like that are on the landscape where I'm from. Many of them have closed because, you know, it's hard to keep a business, you know, in business for that long, but some of them are still there. And so people like my father, was with my child, you know, and I could point out something, and so I'm nervous about what to tell him, what not to tell him. But you know, there was one restaurant, and I said, when Pop was your age, he couldn't go in there, and my son is like, is this some kind of fairy tale? Is this some kind of, you know, some kind of crazy story, you know, because he doesn't understand. Now, of course, I didn't have that experience either, but somebody who is not even old has had that experience. So on the landscape, there are places of exclusion, you know, and there are places that said, you are different, and different meaning inferior, and you are not welcome. And so, so that's a difference. That's a real difference from Vance. So I think class plays a real role in Hillbilly Elegy, and there are certainly people that would say, you know, we don't want poor people here, or you're a certain kind of person, we don't want you here. But the idea that you could change that, you know, Vance is a rich man, you know, and he doesn't have to be that person anymore. But my dad's not rich, but he is still that person, you know, and he still has those kinds of memories and associations. And so it's a real difference. In situations like that, Stephanie, how would you share those historical moments that haven't always been positive with children? Mm-hmm. I think it's a real question for me. And, you know, I try to give my own child just enough, you know, because they don't need a whole lot. They need answers to questions. They don't need the whole spiel, you know. But I think it's important to tell the truth about things, you know. And I don't know how much he, you know, quite gets. I don't know how much he understands. But to have a little bit of it, I think, is important. Sure. To know at least the kind of basics of it, and it'll start to fill in as he gets older. Okay. Well, we got several questions here. Let's tackle the next one. How do you judge if the voices of your various characters are true to their purpose or purposes? That's a tough one. That's a tough question. Who did that?
Where are you?
No, it's a really tough question because I think you're always trying to do that. You know, you're always saying, I have my character is desire. You know, we're always talking about that, and we get this from Aristotle that and the Poetics, right? That man is his desire. Of course, he said man, not people, but man is his desire. And so you have to figure out what does this character want? What does the character want above anything else? And did the character get it? You know? And so if there are enough sorts of obstacles in the way, and if you feel like that you've gotten to a place where we could say yes or no, or, you know, she got it, but she decided she didn't want it, or she got it, but it wasn't enough. But if you can answer that question, then maybe you're there, you know. But it's a tough question.
Sure. Okay, here's a fun one. Where's your dream place to live?
Oh my goodness. Well, I would probably Asheville is big. Have you guys been to Asheville? It's so you know what I mean. It's gorgeous. It's got great food and bookstores, and you know it's a good place. So you know probably somewhere like that. You know.
Okay. In general, what challenges do you see in your story plot with the present experiences of African Americans in today's America?
With the plot of the novel.
Yes.
I think that we're living in a very interesting, you know, like it's, may you live in interesting times. Nobody wants to live in interesting times. You want to live in absolutely, completely boring times where everything is okay. But we are living in interesting times, and so we see a movement for people, for women, for minorities, for people of color, and that feels different and has a certain kind of energy to it. And so there's that, and then there's how do you translate that into your everyday life? So you know that people are doing all these kinds of things, whether it be protesting or suing or you know or standing up for different kinds of rights and beliefs. But what does that mean for you at your job? You know, and so that's I think what we're negotiating in the community.
Okay. Okay, this one's been asked. They wanted to know, of course, about your artist. Discuss how setting affects a story, and was the setting similar to your hometown experience?
Yes, my novel is set in rural North Carolina, and is set mostly in the Piedmont, the sort of the mountain areas, but mostly in the Piedmont in North Carolina. And so I know that landscape, but when I started to do research about it, and I think it's important, even if you feel like you know this place backwards and forwards, it's important to do some research because you always find out something interesting, you know, and something new about it. And so I do know this place, but one of the things I found out that I thought was really interesting, and did end up in a very small part in the novel, is in my hometown there was a hotel where the black doctors, they were white men, but they saw the black women in the community, where they would see the black women if they needed OBGYN services. And so I talked to women who had been to the hotel, who had been part of this, and you know, so many of them were like, they waited until the absolute last minute because they did not want to be in that space because they were not treated with kindness, or and if you were, you know, if you weren't an ideal weight or beautiful, you were treated even worse, and you know, and so I had never even heard of this hotel. I had no idea it even existed, but just kind of meandering around doing research, I learned about something, you know, and my family's lived there for generations, and
Right.
I didn't know about it.
The importance of trust, right, and a safe place for people to come and be cared for.
Yes.
Tell us about your new book and what are you currently working on?
I've got a couple of things that I'm in the middle of. As I said, I'm always sort of working on a couple of things. I have a friend who's into astrology, and and he's like, "You're a Gemini. You always have two things, you know." And so I've got a couple of things. One is a story about there's a woman, Johnny, from the book, who is Don's girlfriend. And she leaves him and she goes to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And Winston-Salem was a place that the Moravians set up a settlement. It's also, I live in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and that's also a place that the Moravians have set up a settlement. And so I've been really interested in them. They're super fascinating. And so, anyway, Johnny goes to Winston-Salem. She meets someone, an older woman, not old, just older than her, and they form a friendship. And they're trying to figure out how to get power in the world. I mean, that's ultimately what they're trying to do. And they become part of this religious organization, and they have to figure out how to get their power. And their power is really through language, you know. And so I started thinking about this because I was thinking about the Salem witch trials, and I was thinking about you probably read, like, teenage girls were so important in those trials, you know, because they were the ones, you know, whispering, "I saw so-and-so, you know, in the meadow, and it was dark." And, you know, and this is a way of assuming and getting power in the world. And especially if you're a teenage girl, you got zip, you know, and especially in that time. So that's one of the projects.
Sure. What do you think about the term cultural appropriation? And can you address it in future, or will you address it in future works?
Cultural appropriation?
Cultural appropriation.
I certainly think it's possible to appropriate someone's culture. And I do think that it's the mission of the writer to kind of take on the life of the protagonist. I think that's really important. And what you're doing is you're trying to embody another person. And there's something that so bothers me. With my students, I hear all the time, I don't want to write a black character because it's going to be cultural appropriation, or I don't want to write a male character if I'm female, you know, this kind of thing. And like, that is our enterprise. That is what we do. We say we are taking on these lives and we're trying to portray them the best that we can with all due diligence and with all the heart that we have. We're trying to figure out who this person is and how this person lives. And so, will we get it wrong? Yes, we will get things wrong. But I'm going to get things wrong about being an African-American woman from the South. I mean, you can't let that stop you from trying to make an honest portrayal. So, can there be cultural appropriation? Absolutely. And we have now sensitivity readers. Maybe you guys have heard of those, especially with young adult novels. And they're people who read them first and say, you know, this is all messed up. This portrayal of this Muslim woman or this black woman, this ridiculous, you know, that kind of thing. And then the writer goes back and tries to address some of those issues. I'm not against that idea, but I do think that it's important that we not lose the whole mission of what we're doing, right. You know, and the idea that somehow I can embody one character, but I can't embody another. I think it negates what's important about our art.
Along that same line, have you used or have you thought of using an individual character in one of your future works from different intersecting identities, or maybe non-binary male, female? Mm-hmm. And what would that look like? Have you thought about that?
I haven't had a character who was who was a kind of non-binary character. I have not yet. It's just because that isn't, it just hasn't been the thing that that's come to me, you know. And I do think that's, I think that the people who are doing that are doing it beautifully, you know, in some cases, but it's just not been the story that I want. And people ask me all the time, why don't you write this story, or why don't you write that story, you know? Mm-hmm. sometimes I'm like, no, you write that story. You know, that's your story. You love it. There's something in it that's speaking to you that says, I need to understand this. That's your story. You write it, you know. But so far, not.
Sure. I'm sure you've met many people, and this one is asking you specifically, have you met Sarah Jessica Parker?
Yes.
Tell us about that experience.
I did. These are my Sarah Jessica Parker shoes.
Oh,
So, and she said, I love your shoes. Yeah. So I wear them to readings. But yes, she chose my book for the American Library Association book club. And so I got to meet her, and we were on stage together. It was really exciting. And my son was there, my husband was there, and as soon as she saw my son, she comes up to him, and he was 7 at the time, and she's beautiful, and she's big, you know, and really, really nice. And she goes up to my son, and she puts her, hands on his shoulders, and she says, "You are so beautiful." And my son says, "You look good too."
Good for him. All right, we're coming to our last few questions here. This one reads, for what it's worth, I too have thanked janitors and others who are often unseen and are usually or underappreciated. Why? To express genuine thanks, to hopefully give an unseen recognition, however small that might be, and to be kind. I mean, no disrespect. I hope it's not seen as condensation. My intentions are good, and I hope to add some kindness in what can be in an unkind world. Thank you for coming. A woman who has been unseen herself. Okay.
That's a lovely way to put it. And I think that's why the moment just resonated with me so much, because part of me felt like that the normal, obvious response is just, thank you, right? But, then I started thinking, well, do I have to respond to someone who has decided that it's time I will say this? Does it have to be my time to respond? And then I thought, well, isn't it just polite? Isn't it just like general kind of courtesy to just say,
right.
Or at least kind of, even a head nod or something, some acknowledgement. And so I've been batting around with that because I feel like I know that my impulse is not to blame this poor woman who's doing this very difficult job, and so I know I'm feeling that. I don't want to say, oh well, she was rude, so that's part of it. But I also am trying to figure it out. Is there a way that it makes sense and it isn't unkind?
Sure.
But whoever does that, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I like to be thanked. I mean, I don't have a job that I don't have a non-aspirational job. I don't have a job where I have to get dirty or anything. But I do like to be thanked. I love it when my students leave me notes or or that kind of thing, and I feel like most people do. So I will continue to say thank you if there's a moment to do that.
What's your advice for a writer that just recognize that they want to write, but they're a little bit older than maybe your students at your university? What kind of advice do you have for them?
Oh, start writing right now.
Start writing immediately.
Yes, right? Absolutely. And I love writing for so many reasons, and one, because it's so democratic. You cannot be a ballerina, at 36. You can't do it, but you can be a writer, and you start the whole process right now. And my students, they have youth, and that's fantastic, and they have great energy, and they have great ideas, but they don't have perspective, and they don't have world knowledge, So there's give and take all the way around.
So the experience from an older someone that you'd had more experiences can certainly help in that process.
Absolutely. And, and also just the kind of experience in the world, like, this is important. It's important to say, to contribute to the conversation of the world.
Sure.
And sometimes you don't know that until you've lived a little while, and then you understand there are some things that are important. There are some things in life that are truly important. There's some things in life that I thought were important and maybe not so much. And so, but that you have some kinds of wisdom that younger people don't. So, maybe there are cons, but there are a lot of pros too.
My son is 17 years old. The other day he told me, Dad, if I ever write a book, I'm going to title it, The Stories My Dad Told Me.
That's good. That's
I
good.
said, right on, Richie, that's great. That's a great title. So we'll see how that goes. A couple last questions here. Was Gatsby always your background, reversed, intentional, or did it evolve?
It definitely evolved. The story started in a very different place. I was doing research for a story, and I did an interview with a mortician in North Carolina. He's a really eccentric guy. His name's Gary. He's a white guy. He's got a great big mustache. He was so much fun, and he told me lots of different stories. And one of the stories that he told me was about this family that had lost their child. He was 24 in this totally freak car accident. The car was even fine, but the child was dead. He hadn't been on drugs or anything like that. It was just totally freak accident. And so they had decided that they would pray him back to life, that he had not yet crossed over some barrier, and that God would allow them the 30 seconds that it would take to bring him back, would give them that 30 seconds back, because that's all it was. And the mother couldn't believe. She kept saying there in the newspaper articles, she kept saying, God has promised us abundant life, and I can't believe that my son didn't get that, and so I'm only asking for that 30 seconds. And just the mother broke my heart. I mean, and so that story is where I started my novel. The family that did the vigil, that did the 4-day vigil, they were white. They lived in a very small town, just about 700 people. And they stopped the vigil when they learned that the big news organizations were coming. The Datelines, and they felt like that they were going to be made to look like fools and idiots and rubes and all that kind of thing, and so they shut it down. And so my family, it was the family that is in the book, except they were 17 years younger, all of them.
Sure.
And so I started writing that story. It took me about 3 years to get that draft. And I never quite liked it. I thought I liked the characters, but I never liked the story. I didn't feel like it was in the right place. And so I thought, I don't think this is a story about the moment of grief. I don't think that's what it is. And so I set it to much later, where it is now, 17 years later. And I thought, one of the things I kept wondering when I was writing the first story is, will he come back? And that's kind of the essential question. And one of my friends who reads, we read each other's work, and she said, I kept expecting him to come back. And I was thinking, why is she expecting that? Because it wasn't a book about magical realism. It wasn't that kind of book. And so I thought, I think it does need to be a return. And so when I thought about that, I thought, I bet it's, I think it is a return of someone. Who could that be? And then I started getting into the whole Gatsby thing. And that was, it started as a kind of joke. I was at an award ceremony, and somebody asked me, what's your new book about? And I said, well, it's Gatsby, except it's set 90 years later with poor black people in North Carolina. And I thought that was clearly a joke. And they said, oh, a Gatsby reboot. And then I said, oh, it's Gatsby reboot.
Interesting. Last question here, Stephanie. Publisher comments, changes made in the book? Any?
Yeah. I have a very good editor, and she has a very light touch. And when let me first say, it took me a long time to publish my first book. I was really in a terrible space. I was like, I'm never going to get this thing published. And, it took me a long time to publish my first one. My second one, I sold it in 24 hours. So I have the kind of both ends of the spectrum. And the publisher that I chose is fantastic. And she will have suggestions, but she doesn't give a kind of hard kind of critique. And she'll say things like, what do you think if this happens? That sort of thing. It's a very light touch, which I really, really appreciate,
Please help me thank
Thank you.
Powell Watts.